All right. Have a nice day. Back to back here. So we're outside. I'm going to talk today about a subject. We talked about humor a little bit. I'm going to talk about irony today. Now, I say that when I say irony, I know that out there watching are irony Nazis. By irony Nazis, you know who you are. You point out. You're the ones that have to point out that something is not actually irony. The irony, I think, in that is that a lot of times it's been pointed out to me that something is not ironic, that actually is ironic. And but people just love to be smart, so smart that they'll say, that's not ironic. It actually is. So, I'm just going to launch into this, and whether this is irony or not, I'm going to call it that. So it might be what they call situational irony. But someone pointed out, we're going to find out years from now that actually all the hand sanitizer and the washing of the hands, it like took like the top layers of our skin off and made us more susceptible to this virus or whatever, and we ended up doing so much damage. Now that I assume that that's an irony, but another thing that just there's all these little observations like this. Someone else pointed out, and I heard, I wish these were all original, that I was the one observing these because they're all really clever. But I want you to think about some of the reports you've heard more recently, and you've watched it on the news. These young kids, and they're in California or they're in Florida, right? And they're just, what scofflaws, and they are completely throwing caution to the wind, and we're going to do what we're going to do, and I want you to stop and think. Of course, everybody's enraged over that, but I want you to stop and think, who is the most enraged over this? Well, of course, it's the most susceptible people, or relatives of the most susceptible people in our society, which is the elderly. Now, I want you to think about the majority of the people who are in that age bracket, maybe not all of them, it's different age brackets, but the majority of the people in this age bracket, I want you to think about where they were. Obviously not all of them, only a handful, but the general concept. Where were they? Say 50 years ago. Well, about 50 years ago, a good portion of them were at Woodstock. Now, can you think of in our history a less hygienic, less social distancing period than the 60s? They might not all have been at Woodstock or Watkins Glen or some of these famous concerts from the 60s, but just in general, that generation introduced us to the most filthy of situations that one could possibly live in, and flouting. They were the poster child of scofflaw people, was the 60s generation. All the nasty things that they did, just filthy and disgusting. Every first-hand account that came out of those concerts, just the masses of people doing anything and everything that came into their mind to do. And they look at these people today. It's tame, what's going on in Florida by comparison. But Matthew 7 and then later Matthew 12 kind of talks a lot about this idea. And he says, you should be careful not to judge, because that same judgment that you use to judge is going to be brought back to you a little bit later. Matthew 12, he says, your words are going to condemn you. Or they're going to declare you innocent, whatever. The things you do, the things you say, those are the standard. The standard you wish to set is the standard that's going to be used. So you get to determine that. So people get to determine that. What standard am I going to use? Well, that generation used a standard. They used a lot of standards that have come back to haunt them. More serious than just those ironies that we notice. But that was the generation that rejected God, right? That was the generation that determined that they wanted to do whatever they wanted, didn't want anybody to tell them what to do. And what have they reaped? They've reaped a young generation that simply says, well, this is the standard you set up, and so we're living by it. I don't care what you say, and we're going to California, we're going to Florida, and we're having fun. You said, this is the standard you set up, so this is what we're doing. And we don't care if we infect you later on. We're having fun. We're not in the prime target for this. We're not likely to get, I mean, we might get a little sick, but hey, this is my spring break. They kicked me out of school. I'm going to go have fun. And that was the standard set up by those same people 50 years ago. And so that generation, you go back 50 years, well, that generation grew up, and while they hated to, I mean, they just despised the establishment, quote unquote. Well, they became the establishment. And they became the ones that established curriculums for schools and all sorts of really disgusting things that they've put into schools. Some people are now at home forced to homeschool and are seeing some of those curriculum, and there's various reports of, I didn't know that they were teaching my kid this, which is your shame, I suppose, that if you don't know what your kids are being taught in public schools, but all of a sudden, hey, whoa, what are you teaching my kid? So that's going to have some interesting effects, but I don't want to stray too far. But these are the people that taught these curriculums, that all centered around the idea that God is an outdated idea. And so when God became an outdated idea, then a lot of the things that God promotes in a society, that help a society, end up going along with it. And now we reap the benefits of that. We have people that simply don't care about other people because we've been taught that I'm number one and I'm the most important person, and so what feels good, do it. That's the call of the 60s. And so now people are obeying that because there is no higher power. There's nothing that is supposed to determine our relationships between other people other than the immediate gratification that I get. Well, God says, listen, this is the way it happens. You establish a standard, and that's the standard that's going to be used. It's not a supernatural thing. It's just a natural phenomenon. You establish a standard. This is the standard that people that come after you will use. So be careful what standards you use. And so they've turned out a young generation that has disregard for life because they've spent their life's work. Their life's work has been to undermine the value of life. And there's no better example of that than even in this situation that we find ourselves in. They demand that abortion clinics maintain their essential status and be kept open. While we're in all the social, that is one thing that has to happen because this is their call, their need to determine that life does not have higher purpose. That is the underlying cause of everything that they've been about for the last 50 years or more. So this is a reminder in this irony to understand that the ironies of life do catch up with us in time. We find the standard that we set for other people. So be cautious with the standard that you set because it is coming back to you. If you create a self-serving standard, and this is what is beneficial to me right now, then understand that it may be your kids, or may be your grandkids, or the people around you at work, whatever. They will use that when it's convenient to them, and they will cite you as the source. So-and-so said. Well, now it comes back to you. Or we can, as a church, try to establish a higher standard and live by that standard, and understand that one other thing that God says is that in the end, mercy triumphs over judgment. So if we establish a standard of mercy, then we will reap that.